Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Now, in our previous lecture, we had started talking about Mauryan administration. We had discussed the issue of the level of centralization in Mauryan administration. And today, we are going to talk about the important characteristics and features of Mauryan administration. Before we do that, let us first outline the important sources to study Mauryan administration. क्या क्या है बताइए. The arthashastra. What else? The Indica of Megasthenes. What else? Certain Buddhist sources such as the Digha Nikaya. Now, the Digha Nikaya is one of the 5 volumes of the Sutta Pitaka. It is subdivided into various suttas or chapters, such as the Lakhan Sutta and the Chakravati Sihanda Sutta. These suttas talk about things such as the duties of the king, etc. Right? Then we have later works such as the Mudra Rakshasa of Vishakha Dutt. Then we also get information regarding the Mauryan administration from the Ashokan edicts. The Mauryan coins, etc. Right? However, each of them suffer from their own set of limitations. For example, अर्थशास्त्र का लिमिटेशन क्या है? हाँ, first of all, it is a normative text that deals with ideals. It is in the form of an advice given to a would-be conqueror or a great ruler. It talks in the terms of ideals of administration, that these are the ideals that should be followed. It does not necessarily reflect the ground reality. And secondly, और क्या problem है? There are doubts regarding its authorship. What else? Certain portions of the Arthashastra appear to be pre-Mauryan, certain portions appear to be post-Mauryan. So it is not entirely coterminous. That means it does not belong only to the Mauryan period. These are the limitations of the Arthashastra. Similarly, with regards to the Megasthenes, to the Indica of Megasthenes, what are the problems? It is a work of a foreign author. Therefore, it suffers from the routine problems suffered by all foreign writers, such as not understanding the correct context of their observations, perceiving things in India through their foreign cultural lenses, then having to cover a vast area in a short period of time. They do not write in specifics. Further, many foreign travelers, such as Megasthenes, were royal guests, so they had a court bias or an elite bias to their writing. They did not have first-hand experience of the things that they were writing about. There are certain embellishments also, right? And apart from this, the Indica of Megasthenes, does it appear to us as a primary source? No, as a highly filtered version in the excerpts of later Greek and Roman scholars. So it is a secondary source that is highly filtered. These are the problems with the Indica of Megasthenes. Then with the Digha Nikaya, what are going to be the problems? What kind of a work is it? Is it a work on administration? No, it is a religious work. And Buddhist literature, what kind of attitude did it have towards Ashoka in particular and the Mauryans in general? Negative or favorable? Highly favorable. So there is an element of strong religious bias that is present over here. Secondly, it is a religious work and information on administration is tangential. That means it is light on details. And thirdly, what are the things that it talks about? What should be the duties of the king? How he should look towards the people? What should be his attitude towards the Sangha? How he should treat the Brahmins, right? These kinds of things. So once again, like the Arthashastra, it is also a normative text. Okay? Then the Mudra Rakshasa of Vishakha Dutt, what are the problems with it? Did Vishakha Dutt live during the Mauryan age? No, he was a scholar of the Gupta age that was writing about certain developments during the Mauryan age, which were 600 years before his own time. Therefore, it is a secondary source to learn about Mauryan history. Secondly, what kind of a work is it? Is it a political treatise? Is it a work on statecraft? Is it a work on law, on administration? No, it is none of those things. It is a drama. It is a play written by Vishakha Dutt. And drama में factual accuracy, is it wise to expect it? No. Therefore, many things would have been given the dramatic effect since the artist, since the author took a dramatic or artistic license. Right? Many of these things must have been sensationalized. With the Ashokan edicts, what is the problem? Who was it commissioned by? By Ashok only. What is the main theme of the Ashokan edicts? Dhamma. Does he give very many details about administration? No. So, first of all, there is going to be a strong royal bias in which Ashok may not be forthcoming about several important details. Secondly, the main focus was Dhamma. And therefore, details about administration are light. ठीक है? With respect to the Mauryan coins, do they carry names, dates, or images of kings or gods? Do they carry any inscriptions? ये सब नहीं मिलता है. These are punch marked coins. And thus, their utility from the point of administration of the Mauryan age is limited. It has limited utility. क्लियर है इतना? डिक्टेट तो नहीं करवाना है ये. चलिए, these are the important sources to learn about Mauryan administration. Now, what are the different things that we have to talk about? We need to talk about central administration, including the position of the king, the council of ministers, the bureaucracy. We need to talk about the military and taxation. ठीक है? Further, we also need to talk about provincial administration, and city administration. One important theme of our discussion will be to highlight the elements of centralization as well as decentralization in each of these levels of administration. Okay? So first, beginning with the central administration. With regards to the king, what were the characteristics of the king? He was an autocratic or despotic ruler. There was an element of despotism present. The king enjoyed autocratic control, meaning that he enjoyed absolute power, with there being no practical checks on his authority. The institution of kingship was hereditary in nature. And an element of divinity was associated with the institution of kingship. So the idea of semi-divine kingship was present. Divine kingship मतलब अगर राजा बोल दे that I am God himself, और semi-divine kingship I am the one chosen by God. तो ये difference होगा. So divine kingship means the ruler is claiming godly powers, right? Now, according to the Arthashastra, what are the necessary qualities of the king? कैसा होना चाहिए? Can anybody from the street become the king, or does the king necessarily have to be of noble birth? He has to be of noble birth. Okay? So the king must be of noble birth. Can everybody of noble birth claim kingship? No. The king must also be well trained in military tactics, economics, and political theory. Not only should he have bookish knowledge, he also should have real lived experience. He should be well experienced in administration, war, and financial management. Further, the king should also be ready to discharge his duties 24/7. Further, should the king seek to perform all the stately functions himself, or should he delegate his duties to his subordinates, to trusted officials and ministers? He should delegate. The king should delegate his responsibilities to trusted ministers and officials. Should he blindly trust these officials? No. He should remain eternally vigilant and severely punish disloyalty. Should he only rule by fear? No. At the same time, he should also reward loyalty and capability. Is the job of the king only to maintain order and extract revenue? No. The king should ensure the happiness of the subjects as well. ठीक है. So according to him, these should be the duties of the king. And this idea that he should ensure the happiness of his subjects is also echoed by the Dharma Sutras. The Dharma Sutras refer to the king as the Dharma Pravartak. That is, protector of Dharma. Now, obviously, the Dharma Sutras, how would they define Dharma? They would take it to mean the Varnashram Dharma system, right? That is upholding the Varna-based social order. However, the Arthashastra seeks to redefine it. Arthashastra कैसे redefine करता है? It says that the king is the conductor of the very life of the entire institution, entire state. He is at the center of the state machinery. Everything should happen in accordance with him, and he is ultimately responsible for the well-being of his people, for the happiness of his subjects. Therefore, not only should he seek to maintain order and extract obedience from his subjects, he should also be looking after their welfare. Okay. So you can say over here that according to the Arthashastra, by saying that the king should ensure the happiness of the subjects, it was advising the ruler to be mindful of his subjects' welfare. Write down this. This impose the duty on the king to look after his subjects' welfare. His subjects' welfare. Now, continuing further with the institution of kingship, does the picture provided by Arthashastra and the Dharma Sutras reflect the vision of a highly centralized institution or a decentralized institution? Highly centralized institution. So, the institution of kingship appears to be highly centralized. This is reflected in the title assumed by Ashok as well. क्या title? Devanam Piya Piyadasi, right? Now, why do you think Ashok assumed such a title? Or gave concepts such as Dhamma? What was he trying to do? He was trying to transform the very nature of kingship. Kingship is considered to be sovereignty over the material world, right? Now हमने महाजनपद पीरियड में देखा था that ruling class was being supported by another very powerful class. कौन? The priestly class. What was their source of power? The priestly class. command over religion, command over the spiritual world. By giving concepts such as Devnampiya, Piyadasi, or Dhamma, what was Ashok trying to do? He was trying to reduce the role of the priestly class from affairs of state. He was trying to transform the institution of kingship into an institution that was both secular as well as spiritual. So he was claiming a command of both spiritual as well as secular ownership or secular sovereignty. ठीक है? So अभी क्या लिखा आपने? The institution of kingship appears to be highly centralized, as indicated by the royal title of Devnampiya Piyadasi. The royal title of Devnampiya Piyadasi, or the concept of Dhamma, or the concept of Dhamma. Full stop. In purely political terms, it represented the effort by Ashok to centralize both secular and spiritual authority in the throne, thus reducing the role of the priestly class or other power brokers in political matters. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. This transition towards royal supremacy is also reflected in the arthashastra. ठीक है? Now the arthashastra talks about two kinds of law. It recognizes both as legitimate sources of law. The laws mentioned in the Dharma Sutras and the secular laws that are made by the king in response to emerging challenges and opportunities without consulting the priestly class or the Dharma Sutras. They may even deviate from the Dharma Sutras. Out of these, अर्थशास्त्र ज्यादा प्रायोरिटी किसको देगा? नहीं. Even though it was the work of a Brahmanical scholar, he has given primacy to the secular laws, that in case there is a conflict between the secular laws and the Dharma Sutras, the secular law should prevail. It should supersede the laws given by the Dharma Sutras. And why is this? Because the objective of the Dharma Sutras and the arthashastra are different, right? Dharma sutras fall primarily into the category of what kind of work? Religious or secular work? Religious work. While arthashastra is a secular work. While the Dharma Sutras are primarily concerned with which realm? The spiritual realm or the material realm? Spiritual realm. So, out of the four Purusharthas, Dharma, Arth, Kam and Moksha, ये किसके लिए concerned है ज्यादा? Dharma, that is the Varna Ashram Dharma system, and Moksha. While the Arthashastra is concerned only with the material world, that is अर्थ, राइट? तो प्राइमेसी यहां पे किसको दिया जाएगा? अर्थ ओवर धर्म, सेक्युलर लॉज ओवर दी धर्म सूत्रास, ठीक है? सो व्हाट इज द लाइन दैट यू हैव रिटन? दिस ट्रांजिशन टुवर्ड्स रॉयल सुप्रीमेसी इज आल्सो रिफ्लेक्टेड इन द अर्थशास्त्र. आगे लिखो, which recognizes both the laws codified in the Dharma Sutras as well as secular laws made by the rulers as well as by the Dharma Sutras as well as secular laws made by the rulers without consulting the Dharma Sutras as valid. Subpoint. However, the Dharma Sutras as valid. However, subpoint. However, in case of a conflict, the Arthashastra clearly states that the secular law should prevail. ठीक है? So once again, this tells us that there was a strong element of centralization. However, there were limitations to this. Now, one way in which the adoption of the title Devnam Piya Piyadasi has been interpreted is that it had become a practical necessity by this point of time. क्यों? This was because of the nature of the Mauryan Empire and the process of its formation. ठीक है? You remember last class में हमने discuss किया था that G.R. Fussman has put forward the idea that the Mauryan Empire was not the full-fledged result of military conquest alone. Rather, some parts of it were added to the empire through the integrative process. Okay. So Mauryan expansion followed the integrative model, at least in some cases. As evidence, we can cite the Junagadh rock inscription, which talks about the Greek ruler Tusappa or Tushaspa, who was one of the provincial governors of Ashok. And he is referred to by one of the traditional titles used by kings in Western India. That is not Rajipal or Amatya or Kumar Amatya, nothing like that, but Goptri. Okay? This means that within the same empire, there were at least several people who were claiming royal titles. So, how to distinguish the actual emperor from these underlings, from the vassals? So for that, this religious title or claim of semi-divine kingship would have to be made. Clear? Hai? Write down. On the other hand, comma, the assumption of the Devnam Piya title may have been a practical necessity due to the integrative model of Mauryan imperial expansion. Subpoint. The Junagadh rock inscription of Rudradaman talks about Ashoka's governor of Greek origin, Tusappa, who ruled over the Saurashtra region on Ashoka's behalf. Full stop. Next subpoint. It was therefore necessary to establish a proper hierarchy between the emperor and his vassals through high sounding divine titles. Okay. Next element within the institution of kingship, The law of succession. Was there any fixed rule of succession? Yes. Okay. So according to the Dharma Sutras, the rule of primogeniture should be followed. Further, the arthashastra talks about an important minister known as Yuvraj. Who was he? The crown prince or heir apparent. Right? Who used to nominate the crown prince? The king. While the emperor was still alive or as part of his dying will? While he was still alive. And according to the Arthashastra, what was the role that the Yuvraj played? He ruled alongside the king as a co-ruler. ठीक है? Yuvraj ruled as a co-ruler. And why did the Arthashastra suggest such a thing? Such an arrangement? So that following the death of the emperor, there should not be political chaos. There should be smooth transition of power. Okay? Was this practice actually applied? Yes. Bindusar, before he became king, had served as the Yuvraj under Chandragupta Maurya. And it was this that allowed Chandragupta Maurya to renounce the throne and become a Jain monk, travel to Shravanbelgola and perform Sallekna over there. Similarly, Bindusar also appointed one of his sons as the Yuvraj. Kisse? No, not Ashok. He appointed his eldest son, Susima, as the Yuvraj. Right? And what happened following this after Bindusar's death? War of succession. That means that although there was a fixed law of succession, it was not always followed. Okay? The law of succession was not always followed. Case in point, the 4-year long civil war between Ashok and his brothers. This is according to the Buddhist literature. Clear है इतना? Further, apart from members of the royal family, did anyone else also play an important role in the issue of succession? Why did Susima fail to become emperor? Because he did not enjoy the support of certain key ministers, such as the prime minister Radhagupta. Radhagupta, in fact, sided with Ashok. Therefore, this also tells you that the will of the king was also not completely absolute. Following his death, his successors would not be sure of the support of important ministers and office holders. Okay? So, important ministers and powerful groups also played important roles in the succession issue. Now, if these important ministers or powerful groups are helping one of the candidates to become the emperor, would the candidate be able to follow a completely independent policy? No, he is dependent upon them. They are the ones who are responsible for his throne and are constantly supporting him. The emperor would want to keep on appeasing them, keep them happy, and maintain their support. He would not try to enrage them, right? And therefore, some power would have to be shared with these groups and individuals. Okay. What does this tell you about the level of centralization? It was not perfect, it was not absolute. So, they acted as kingmakers and would have definitely checked the absolute power of the king. ठीक है, ये लिख लिया है, लिखना है, लिख लोगे इसको? ठीक है, समझ में आ गया है ना? तो ये हो गया द इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ किंगशिप. नाउ वी नीड टू टॉक अबाउट द ministers, right? Now, what is the information provided by the arthashastra about ministers? According to the arthashastra, the king should maintain a council of 18 ministers known as तीर्थास. ठीक है. The Arthashastra also names a few important ones, including the Mantri or the Prime Minister, the Yuvraj or the Crown Prince, the Purohit or the Chief Priest, the Samharta or the Chief Revenue Collector, the Sannidhata or the chief treasurer, the Senapati or the commander in chief, the Dharmasthyayi or the chief civil judge, and the Kantak Shodhan, that is the chief judge in criminal affairs. क्लियर है इतना? Is this much clear? Now, while Arthashastra talks of 18 ministers, was this number fixed or could it be variable? It could be variable depending upon the practical conditions, necessities. The emperor had the authority to appoint as many ministers as he saw fit, and the size of the council was not fixed. Now, knowing what you know about the Mauryan Empire, do you think the council would have been of a very small size या फिर rather large council रहा होगा? Large. Why? Empire was extremely large and the functions that it performed were also numerous. Further, Arthashastra also informs the king or instructs the king to have a large rather than a small council because the state has several functions to perform and the king should rely on as many wise advisors as possible rather than listening to only one or two. Okay? The Arthashastra advises the king to have a large council. Since there are many functions that the state must perform. The point, the large size of the Mauryan Empire also indicates the presence of a large council. ठीक है. Now, what was the nature of these ministers? Were these hereditary officers or were they appointed by the kings? They were appointed by the kings. Ministers were not hereditary. They were appointed by the king. How were the ministers paid? In the form of land grants or cash salaries? No, only in the form of cash salaries, never land grants. Why? Because Ashok did not want them to have the ingredients to create their own rival state within his state. लैंड दे दोगे तो उसके साथ रेवेन्यू मिल जाएगा. Network of patronage would also be developed over there. Then the minister would have a territory to defend, a population to support the state, and military that could be raised on the basis of the revenue and the population. In his territory, he could also construct powerful forts, disrupt various routes of transport and communication, blockade important rivers, etc., and thus destabilize the entire kingdom from within. Therefore, कभी भी इस तरह का practice नहीं करना है, which would be counterproductive to the state, and thus never land grants. The ministers were paid high cash salaries. Cash salaries to prevent feudalism, and high salaries to prevent corruption and disloyalty. Did one minister hold only a single portfolio, or did the same minister hold multiple departments? No. एक मिनिस्टर को केवल एक ही डिपार्टमेंट. ठीक है. मिनिस्टर्स held only one office each at any given time. Why? Because if a minister was given multiple functions, then he would be able to concentrate powers. Ashok or the Mauryans wanted to prevent this. That is why हर minister को केवल एक department and his duties as well as jurisdiction would be clearly outlined. This was done to prevent the concentration of powers in the hands of the ministers. ठीक है. What was the role that the ministers performed with respect to the king? They were acting as his representatives within their own domains, within their own jurisdictions. According to the third major rock edict, it was the responsibility of the ministers to ensure that the officials under them were performing their duties. That there was no corruption, that they were not exploiting their power, that all the political policies of the state, all the welfare measures were being done in the manner that was expected. Okay? And what does this tell us about the role of the Council of Ministers? It acted as the link between the king and the lower levels of administration. Write down. Therefore, sub-point. Therefore, the Council of Ministers acted as the common link between the king and his administration. As the common link between the king and his administration. इतना क्लियर है ना? Right. Similarly, the fourth major rock edict says that ministers had the authority to discuss and make decisions regarding matters delegated to them by the king. What does this mean? That जितने भी matters हैं, who is finally responsible for discharging them? The king. And he has the authority to appoint a particular minister or particular group of ministers in the form of a high powered commission to discuss and make decisions on those matters specifically, not any other matters, right? So he can delegate these specific matters to the ministers. Without the king's say so, could any decisions on any kind of matter be made by the ministers or groups of them? No. ठीक है. Further, the Major Rock Edict 4 informs us that they were required to inform the king immediately on such decisions or about such decisions. So what do we see from the Council of Ministers? Element of centralization was present or not? Yes. Next main point you can write. Thus it is clear that the Council of Ministers was the keystone of Mauryan administrative centralization. ठीक है? Was this centralization absolute? No. कैसे पता लगता है? However, हाँ, सब point. Centralization was not absolute. देखो, while all the ministers were supposed to hold a single office, only one office, there was an exception in the form of Chanakya, who simultaneously held the offices of the Mantri as well as Purohit. ठीक है? Secondly, while the king had the authority to delegate matters to his ministers, they were not required to involve the king in these decisions. They simply had to inform the king after the decisions had already been made and implemented. Okay? So, delegation and autonomy, at least in some measure, was enjoyed by the ministers. And thirdly, with regards to the level of centralization, हमने कल की क्लास में जीआर फजमन के कुछ ओपिनियंस को नोट किया था. What did he say? Practical limitations to centralization remained. Third major rock edict talks about the responsibility of the ministers to ensuring that officials under them were performing their duties. Were all these officials located in the cities? No. Under the ministers would be their immediate underlings and the secretarial staff. However, the secretarial staff and the underlings would be in contact and would be overseeing the activities of their subordinates spread throughout the length and breadth of the empire. Transportation and communication were primitive in nature, and therefore local officials would have required a high degree of autonomy. Okay? So there were practical limitations to a high degree of administrative centralization. Clear? ये हो गया the Council of Ministers. I hope this is clear. Next क्या देखना है हमें? The bureaucracy. Yes, the bureaucracy. Let us take a look. Now, what was the nature of the Mauryan bureaucracy? Was it a small one or an extremely large one? Extremely large one. The Mauryans had the largest bureaucracy in the whole of ancient Indian history. And why do you think this was the case? Firstly, because they had the largest territorial empire, right? So an extensive empire required a large bureaucracy to be maintained by the state. Secondly, the roles of the state, were they few or were they extremely large? Extremely large. The state performed several functions, not only the ordinary functions of general administration, policing, revenue collection, and defense, but also extraordinary functions such as direct participation and regulation of the economy. Further, looking after the welfare of not only people but even animals, and the additional responsibility of spreading and ensuring that Dhamma is being observed. So moral policing में भी state involved था. All these functions would require a large number of officials. Functions जितने उतने ज़्यादा functionaries होंगे. And finally, the Mauryan Empire had an extremely large or wide tax net. For any kind of activity imaginable, the state used to collect a tax. So larger the number of tax, larger the number of tax administrators that would be required. Okay. Now, were the Mauryan civil servants selected by competition? No, there was no system of competitive examination for selecting civil servants. Rather, civil servants were selected and trained under the patronage system, meaning that officials at higher levels would hand pick people from the subject population, maybe even those who were known to them in personal life, या फिर जिनकी अर्जी आई है, जिनकी दलील आई है, जिन्होंने रिश्वत दी है, to be trained as civil servants and work at the lower levels of administration. Then through recognition and promotion, they would rise to the upper levels. Ministers would have their own patronage or own retinue of bureaucrats. Lekin the state also used to ensure that the civil servants should be performing their duties. ऐसा नहीं है कि किसी भी लल्लू पंजू को उठा करके आप गवर्नमेंट ऑफिस दे दोगे. They should have sufficient training as well as education and should be able to perform the tasks that are required of them. ठीक है. So there was no system of competitive examination. Civil servants were selected and trained under the patronage system. What kinds of salaries were they paid? In land or in cash? Cash. Low salaries or extremely high salaries? High salaries. So they were paid high cash salaries. How to ensure that there was no corruption? They were subjected to surprise inspections. And had to adhere to an elaborate system of record keeping. So accounts and ledgers would have to be maintained at every level of administration. They would all be tallied by royal inspectors or assessors, and any mismatch would be highlighted. The concerned officials would be questioned, and if found guilty, they would be given severe punishments as well. Okay. Further, Ashok informs us that he had in his rock edicts, he had instructed the Rajukas and Yuktas to travel throughout the area of jurisdiction. Okay. So they had to take yearly tours of the area under their jurisdiction. And who would maintain an eye on them? The provincial governors, the king, etc. They also used to take gubernatorial or royal tours of their own. Yeah. Spy system was also extremely strong, but spies would be employed primarily to look at or to keep an eye on the activities of provincial governors or important ministers. Lower level functionaries नुकसान भी करेंगे तो कितना ज्यादा कर देंगे. ठीक है. That was the idea over here. Now, would these officials be posted permanently in the same location, or would they be transferred regularly? They were regularly transferred. They were transferred frequently. ठीक है. Now, while these officials may have been appointed by their immediate superiors in certain cases, who had the absolute authority to transfer them or to remove them from office? No, the king directly. Okay? So the king had the authority to promote transfer and remove officials. Officials working in the central government would be paid by which government? The central treasury or the provincial treasury? Central treasury. Okay. And what about provincial officials? They would be paid by the royal treasury at the center or the provincial treasury at the provincial capitals? No, also by the royal treasury. Okay. So paymaster of all officials was the king himself. And why was this done? In order to ensure that they remain answerable and loyal to the king rather than their immediate superiors, who may be ambitious and may be trying to subvert the authority of the ruler. Okay. Now, the Arthashastra mentions 18 tirthas. Similarly, it has also mentioned 28 heads of department or adhyakshas. These were heads of various central government departments. Okay. Some of the important ones included the Sita Adhyaksha, the Lavan Adhyaksha, the Akar Adhyaksha, the Potuva Adhyaksha, the Mudra Adhyaksha, the Maurya Adhyaksha, the Roop Darshak, the Nauka Adhyaksha, etc. Sita Adhyaksha was in charge of Crown's land. Lavan Adhyaksh was in charge of the manufacture, processing and sale of salt. Akar Adhyaksh was in charge of mines. Potuva Adhyaksh was in charge of weights and measures. Mudra Adhyaksh was in charge of passports. Mudra Adhyaksh was in charge of currency. Roop Darshak was in charge of the royal mints. That is where coins were struck. And Nauka Adhyaksh was in charge of ships and boats. Ships, boats, and ports. Now, this list must give you an idea of the roles performed by the state as well. Okay? Was it performing the mundane roles of the state, or did the state have extraordinary roles also? Extraordinary roles also. For example, the state was directly involved in agriculture, right? It had a large share of land, arable land, which it got cultivated through sharecroppers or wage laborers or slaves. The state also maintained a complete monopoly on the manufacture and sale of salt. The state also monopolized mining of crucial materials such as iron and coal. Apart from this, the state also had a monopoly on the manufacture of arms and armaments. Okay? Further, the state also regulated almost every area of the economy. It had its own department of weights and measures. It inspected the quality of goods being sold. It even had the authority to fix the profits of different categories of goods. If it was a first hand good that was being sold, so a certain profit at a certain price. If a second category of second hand good was being sold, then at not above a certain price. तो price ceilings ये set कर सकते थे. ठीक है? So write down. Next main point लिखो. This also indicates that the state performed a large number of economic functions. Full stop. Sub point. It was involved in agriculture in a major way. It was involved in agriculture in a major way. Employing a large number of sharecroppers, wage laborers, and slaves. Sharecroppers, wage laborers, and slaves. Next point. It had a complete monopoly. On salt and other minerals such as iron and coal. Full stop. Next point. It also had a monopoly on the manufacture and sale of weapons. Full stop. Next point. It had the power to fix price ceilings, comma, profits, and regulate the standards of goods being sold, standards or quality of goods being sold, standards of goods being sold. Next point. The state also collected a large variety of taxes, tolls, and fines. Taxes, tolls, and fines. ठीक है? Now, ये हो गया the bureaucracy. Next, what do we have to study? The military administration of the Mauryans. What do we see? Military administration. How was the Mauryan Empire created? Through military conquest, right? And therefore, military not only played a very important role in state formation, but also in its expansion. Not only that, in the defense of the empire, and not only that, it was also used in suppressing rebellions and maintaining order. Okay? So stability within the state and protection from outside forces depended upon a strong military. So the Mauryan Empire was a war state in which the military played a crucial role. The military played a crucial role. The Mauryan Empire was a war state in which the military played a crucial role. So a military that was capable of creating such a large empire and defending such a large empire for such a long period of time, do you think it would have been a weak one or an extremely strong one? Extremely strong military. Numerically, it would have been extremely large and well administered. And this is the picture that is reflected in the Greek sources as well. Okay? The Indica of Megasthenes plays gives close attention to the Mauryan military. According to them, according to Megasthenes, it was a large and well organized military. How large? We don't know exactly because the Indica of Megasthenes is no longer available to us, and different sources who have quoted Megasthenes have cited different figures. But all of them agree that it consisted of four chief elements and that all of them were extremely large. फोर मेन एलिमेंट्स क्या थे मिलिट्री के? बताओ. दी elephantry, cavalry, infantry, and the chariot force. Okay. This is the list that is cited by Mauryan, Plutarch, as well as Pliny the Elder. When talking about the army of Chandragupta Maurya that had defeated Seleucus Nicator. Okay. Plutarch goes on to claim that Chandragupta Maurya's army had 9,000 elephants, 20,000 cavalry, 80,000 infantry, and 8,000 chariots. ठीक है, ऐसा प्लूटार्क ने क्लेम किया है. The other cite different numbers, but all of them are extremely large. Clear? Now, the issue of military administration Megasthenes informs us that it was in the hands of a council of 30 members who were divided into 6 committees. हर कमिटी में कितने मेंबर? 5 members. Of 5 members each. Okay. Each of these committees looked after a separate function or a separate department of military administration. There was one committee to look after the infantry, one committee to look after the logistics, one committee to look after the elephantry, another to look after the navy, another to look after the cavalry, and finally one to look after the chariot contingent. ठीक है. Now, are the Greek sources going to be highly accurate with regards to details about military administration or even the size of the military? No. Why? Because Megasthenes has talked only about Chandragupta's war with Seleucus Nicator, right? And over there, in order to defend his master, would he have not exaggerated the size of the enemy? Yes, कि हम इसलिए हार गए क्योंकि enemy बहुत ज़्यादा powerful था, and these numbers may have been inflated. But are these numbers unreasonable? No. The war between Seleucus Nicator and Chandragupta Maurya took place in 305 BC, 305 to 303 BC. By that point of time, Chandragupta had already consolidated his control over the whole of North India and even expanded up to the Godavari River. Possibly, parts of the Deccan region were also under his control, and Western India was also under his control. Therefore, resource base of the empire was extremely large. This part of the world is the most fertile region in the entire world, and it supports a large population also. So surplus would also be very large, population would also be very high, and a very strong military would be required to defend such an extensive territory and to expand it further. So while these numbers may have been slightly exaggerated, they are not outside the realm of possibility. In fact, a counter argument can be made kya, that this was only a fraction of the true size of the Mauryan military. तो एक ही front पे तो war लड़ रहा था. What about the other fronts? Do you think he would leave those fronts undefended? No. Do you think he would leave all the towns undefended? No. So a major portion of the Mauryan military was not even involved in this war. Possibly the actual size of the military was much larger. When it comes to military administration, Megasthenes' description is not very reliable. Why? Because it differs very significantly from the description given by Arthashastra, and Megasthenes' version of military administration, framework of military administration, is almost entirely the same as his description of the framework of सिटी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. तो मिलिट्री और सिटी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के एक ही बेसिस हो सकता है, ऐसा कोइंसिडेंस हिस्ट्री में बहुत रेयरली होता है, राइट? एंड एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में तो और भी रेयरली होता है. So that is why it does not seem to be very reliable. Write down. However, 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 this machinery to administer the military does not seem reliable. Or this description of military administration does not seem reliable. Subpoint. There is a big mismatch with respect to the Arthashastra. And next subpoint, Megasthenes uses the same model to describe city administration. Uses the same model to describe city administration. ठीक है? दूसरा इंपॉर्टेंट सोर्स क्या है टू लर्न अबाउट मिलिट्री एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन? दी अर्थशास्त्र, right? Kautilya says that the king has at his disposal the chaturang bal, that is the four-limbed force, thus highlighting the four prominent wings of the military. कौन कौन से? Elephantry, infantry, cavalry, and the chariot force. He also talks about a separate medical corps. ठीक है? Now, according to the Arthashastra, the day-to-day administration of the military, that means discipline within the military, to see that training and equipment is in order, to see that the soldiers are receiving their salaries on time. This would be in the hands of the Senapati, the commander in chief, who would have his own council of military advisors. Okay? However, all of them would be subordinate to the ruler, and the king should be in supreme command of the entire military apparatus. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया military administration. Now, did the military play any role in centralization of royal authority? Yes. So the military was both the cause and the product of royal centralization. How was it the cause of royal centralization? It was through the military that the king ensured expansion of his territory. It was through the military that the king ensured order within the territory. It was through the king that through the military that the king was able to ensure that the administrative machinery and revenue centralization that he has put in place keep on working as they were meant to be. How was the military the product of royal centralization? Because resources that were required to maintain a large military, to train it and equip it, to place it in different strategic parts of the empire, उसके लिए क्या चाहिए होंगे? रिसोर्सेज चाहिए होंगे. वो कहाँ से आते थे? Large tax base से. And what would ensure that all the taxes that are being generated at the producer level are flowing to the center? Centralization. ठीक है? So there was a direct relationship between centralization and military strength. ठीक है, meaning that if military strength weakened, centralization would also weaken, and if centralization strengthened, military strength would also strengthen. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया military administration. Next we have to take a look at taxation. Write down. The Mauryans had an elaborate system of taxation. And collected a large number of taxes, tolls, and fines. What was the need for a large number of taxes? First of all, the state performed several functions. And to perform these functions, who would be required? Functionaries or bureaucrats. Would they work for free? No. So this roles, the expanded roles of the state necessitated them, the state to have a wide tax net. Further, the empire was extensive, and larger the size of the empire, larger its population, more would be the number of officials required, right? To create such a large state and to defend it, what was required? A large military. And finally, the state was not interested only in performing its routine functions of policing and revenue collection and defense. Rather, it was also interested in ensuring the welfare of its subjects. तो वेलफेयर करने के लिए पैसा कहाँ से आएगा? टैक्सेस से आएगा, राइट? Now, what was the most important source of state income? Land revenue, that is bhag or land revenue. It was a portion of the total produce. What was the rate? It was fixed at 1/6 of the total produce according to the arthashastra, but it could be varied from time to time and region to region. Do we have any evidence? Yes. The Rumindai pillar inscription, it was reduced to 1/8 of the total produce. So it was variable over time and space. Next wala, Bali. What was it? A compulsory tax. What was its basis? You need to pay the king because he is powerful, he is the sovereign, he is responsible for your protection. Okay? It was collected on the basis of sovereignty. Then shulk. What was it? A sales tax. Hiranya. It was a tax that was collected in cash form. Possibly from service providers, right? Service providers such as washermen, repairmen, or people who ran restaurants, kitchens, or inns, hotels, rest houses, etc., और इवन prostitutes, right? So उनसे हिरण्य लिया जाता था, pranya. This was an emergency tax. Do you think this kind of tax would be collected regularly? No, this was collected only in the time of an emergency, not natural calamity, generally during war. ठीक है? And generally the state took care that one person had to pay the pranya tax only once in their lifetime. Apart from that, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं दें, right? Then the Arthashastra also mentions 18 different types of taxes collected from cities or durg. ठीक है? These may include goods and services taxes of different varieties, or maybe even tolls. ठीक है? The Arthashastra even gives a formula for the amount of profit that a merchant should make on selling different kinds of goods. So for foreign goods, the profit margin should be no more than 10%. And for domestic goods, it should be no more than 5%. ठीक है? And if somebody collects profit margin of more than 10% or 5%, all of it would be taken away as tax. ठीक है? तो उससे कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. Further, from the wealthy residents, the Arthashastra suggests that an income tax should be collected from wealthy residents. ठीक है? Further, the Mauryan state also collected taxes on hunting, fishing, and forest produce. कितना? 10% of the total value. It also collected taxes on cattle rearing. How much? Once again, 10% of the total value of the cattle, right? उतना टैक्स कलेक्ट कर लिया जाएगा. Why so many taxes? To perform all these functions and maintain the territory and welfare nature of the state, right? With regards to the nature of the taxation system, what kind of a system was it? A progressive one or a regressive one? प्रोग्रेसिव सिस्टम क्या होता है? हाँ, जहां पर टैक्स के रेट्स टैक्स के स्लैब्स पर डिपेंड करते हैं, यानी कि ज्यादा जो वेल्दी होंगे वो ज्यादा प्रोपोर्शन ऑफ देयर इनकम देंगे एज टैक्स, और जो पुअर होंगे दे वुड पे अ स्मॉलर सेक्शन ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन ऑफ द इनकम एज टैक्स. सो आपको यहाँ पे क्या दिख रहा है? टैक्सेशन सिस्टम में are only the wealthy being taxed, or is everybody being taxed? It is everybody that is being taxed. So it was regressive in nature. Since the tax net was extremely wide. And bulk of the taxes were coming from where? Trade and commerce or agriculture? Agriculture. On the whole, agriculturists were well off or better off or poorer than the traders? Poorer, right? So bulk of the taxes came from farmers who were generally poor. Now, was the Mauryan Empire unique in this regard, especially given the period to which it belonged? No, this was the universal feature of all taxation systems around the world at this point of time. So, however, the Mauryan Empire was not alone in having such a system. In fact, in many regards, it was more progressive than any other tax regime in the whole of pre-independence history. And क्यों बोलते हैं हम ऐसा? बताइए. Although the number of taxes was large, the actual weight of the taxes was low, क्योंकि rates जो थे वो relatively low थे. The rate of taxation was relatively low. What were the taxes that were being collected used for? For the welfare of the subjects. ठीक है? So there was a strong welfare element to the state. So the money being collected was not being wasted on unproductive activities. Rather, it was being spent on the welfare of the subjects, the construction of canals, the making construction of bridges, the defense of the realm, the repair of important buildings, the establishment of infirmaries, that is hospitals, the planting of trees along the important trade routes, right? तो आम लोगों की सहूलियत के लिए पैसा खर्च हो रहा था. फर्दर, फ्रॉम दी वेल्दी रेजिडेंट्स ऑफ सिटीज एक एडिशनल इनकम टैक्स कलेक्ट किया जाता था, दैट वाज नॉट कलेक्टेड फ्रॉम दी ऑर्डिनरी रेजिडेंट्स. सो income tax was being collected from wealthy residents, and thus we can say that Mauryan tax regime was more progressive than any other tax regime in the whole of pre-independence Indian history. क्लियर है इतना? राइट. तो ये हो गया हमारा सेंट्रल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. अब क्या बचता है? प्रोविंशियल एंड सिटी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, राइट? सो लेट अस लुक एट दोज आल्सो. The Mauryan Empire was divided into 5 provinces known as Rajyas. They were governed by provincial governors known either as Rajyapal, if they were not of royal blood, if they did not belong to the royal family, or as Kumars, if they were royal princes. These Rajyas were further subdivided into units of sub-provincial administration, namely Pradesh, Vishay, Sthanika, Dronmukhas, Kharvantikas, Sangrahans, which were collections of villages, and finally Gram. ठीक है? The Pradesh represented the district of the Mauryan Empire, and here an official known as Pradeshika was in charge of administration. Other important officials included the Rajuka, Yukta, Sthaniya, Gopa, and Gramika, that is the traditional village headman at the level of Gram, right? Now, स्थानीय और गोपा जो है, We are not certain at which level they were actually functioning, but it appears that they were functioning between the Vishaya and Sangrahan level. स्थानीय का responsibility क्या था? Or they performed the similar kinds of functions, that is maintenance of records. किस चीज के records? Land ownership as well as taxation. Gramika was the village headman and he was assisted by a council of 8 elders. Who assisted the Gramika in performing his different functions, including revenue collection, record keeping, as well as law and order, maintenance of law and order at the village level, and performing judicial functions in some kinds of matters, not in all matters. Okay? Gramika was not a state official, rather he was a local official who may or may not have been an elected one. ठीक है, ये हमको नहीं पता है what was the exact nature in which exact way in which Gramika was chosen. Now the Rajuka was responsible for rural justice and revenue collection. While administering justice, he did not simply have the power to punish offenders, but to reward people who had helped in upholding the system. Okay? So this included both the powers of meting out punishment and reward. Yukta was a secretary. So the title Yukta did not refer to a particular official involved in a particular function. Rather, he worked as this was a class of officials who worked in a secretarial or clerical position for officials such as Rajukas and Pradeshikas. Pradeshika was the district administrator in charge of all functions at the district level, including general administration, revenue administration, maintenance of law and order, and justice. ठीक है? Now, ये जो प्रादेशिका और रजुका हैं, who used to appoint them? The king used to appoint them. They were appointed by the king. or at least by his advisors. Okay? The other officials may or may not have been appointed by the king, but the king used to maintain complete control over the entire hierarchy of officials at the provincial level. How? By paying them, by giving them direct instructions, and by having the power to promote, transfer, or dismiss them. Okay, this we have already discussed. The Rajapals or Kumars were also appointed by the ruler directly. And they had their own council of ministers, with ministers known as Mahamatyas or Mahamatras. Who were they? They were also royal appointees, and they had extensive experience of administration. Earlier in their careers, they would have served as either Rajukas or Pradeshikas and would have been promoted to the position of Mahamatyas. Conversely, the king could appoint special officials to serve as Mahamatras who are personally known to him, who may not have any experience at lower levels of administration, but are trusted by them, but are trusted by the king. So, in order to keep an eye on the Rajapals or the Kumars, some trusted advisor of the king may have been posted as a Mahamatya. Now, while they worked under the Rajapal, they were not entirely answerable to him. Rather, they, in some respects, had the power to report directly to the emperor, bypassing their immediate superior, that is the Rajapal. Okay? So, what do we find over here? Do we find a strong element of centralization or not? Yes, but once again, practical necessities की वजह से some level of decentralization was also visible. Clear? Then finally we come to city administration. Over here we have two primary sources of information: the Indica of Megasthenes and the Arthashastra. According to the Indica, cities, Megasthenes has talked about the city administration of Patliputra and has said that Patliputra was governed by a council of 30 members divided into 6 committees consisting of 5 members each. ठीक है? Same model as military administration, है ना? Each of these 6 committees were responsible for a certain task. The first was responsible for overseeing industry or crafts production. The second was in charge of maintaining records of foreigners, looking after their comfort, guiding them, protecting them, providing them lodging and food, and if they are killed or if they die, then returning their possessions, their goods to their family members, right? It may also have been used to keep an eye on the activities of foreigners. Itna close association hai there. The third was responsible for maintaining records of births and deaths. Okay. There was another one, that was responsible for overseeing the quality of goods being sold. Another that was responsible for overseeing trade and commerce, whether merchants were selling only those goods for which they had obtained licenses and permissions, or they were selling other goods, whether they were paying their fair share of taxes or not, whether they were charging the correct prices or not, or whether they were overcharging. And finally, there was another committee for the collection of tolls. Okay, so does this model seem to be accurate? No. Why? क्या weaknesses हैं Megasthenes के description में? Firstly, it is the same as military administration. Secondly, it is very different from the description given by the arthashastra. And lastly, Megasthenes, by giving this kind of a framework, means to say that city administrators did not perform many functions which are essential parts of urban administration. So it overlooks certain essential functions such as maintenance of hygiene, law and order, what else? Fire safety, etc. Ensuring provisions especially in times of war when cities are threatened to come under siege, right? Building or repair work, ये सब भी तो अर्बन एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर्स को करना होता है ना, तो इनके लिए भी अलग अलग कमिटीज होनी चाहिए थी, बट दे आर नॉट मेंशन्ड, सो इट सीम्स टू बी inaccurate. On the other hand, arthashastra says that city administration was overseen by an official known as nagarka. He had his own secretariat, and under him there were several subordinates such as sthaniyas and gopas. However, the arthashastra remains silent on their exact responsibilities. So केवल नाम मेंशन किया है, the other aspects of their roles remain vague. Clear है? What were the tasks performed by the urban administrators? Provision of security, Maintenance of law and order, collection of local taxes and tolls, provisioning, especially during wartime, building and maintenance works. Further, provision of hygiene and administration of justice for violation of the local laws. Okay. On this basis, it becomes clear that Mauryans had an elaborate urban administration that would have been required to sustain such a large cities. Okay, तो ये हो गया administration. Now we have seen all the important aspects of administration. Now we need to be able to highlight the characteristics or features of Mauryan administration. एक बार वो कर लेते हैं. Then we are going to start with the Mauryan society followed by Mauryan economy. और वो करने के बाद certain debates with regards to the decline of the Mauryan empire वो हमको डिस्कस करना है, and that will end our discussion on the Mauryans. ठीक है, तो आगे का डिस्कशन कल की क्लास से करते हैं. चलिए, थैंक यू फॉर योर टाइम. See you tomorrow.